All right, I am showing 12 o'clock, so I think we're going to get started. I'd like to thank everybody for tuning in today on this Groundhog Day. Apparently, we are expecting 6 more weeks of winters, so for what it's worth. Again, thanks for tuning in to the 2022 Conservation Webinar Series hosted by the Iowa Learning Farms. My name is Nathan Stevenson. I'm with the Iowa Learning Farms here on campus at Iowa State University. And our presenter today is Chris Morris. He is a graduate research assistant with the Department of Sociology and Criminal Justice at Iowa State University. Prior, he spent 15 years as a conservationist with the USDA Natural Resources Conservation Service before enrolling in his graduate studies. So with that said, I'm going to turn things over. Now, if you have questions for Chris, feel free to type them into the chat box. There's going to be opportunities for questions toward the end of the presentation. Without further ado, I'm going to send things over to Chris.
Great. Thank you, Nathan. I appreciate that. And I just want to say thank you to Iowa Learning Farms. This is the first webinar that I've been invited to present, but I've definitely attended many. And it's an amazing organization that does a lot of good in terms of education about conservation and sustainability. So I'm honored to be a part of it, and definitely want to thank everyone for attending today. Looks like we've got a great group of folks. Some of my students from my class may actually be here. So if you are, give a shout out to them and remind you to do your discussion questions. Those are due today for chapter 2. All right. So let's see if I can advance my slide. So I am the person speaking about this project today, but this is definitely a team effort. First of all, the Conservation Practitioner Poll is a partnership between the Soil and Water Conservation Society, Iowa State University Extension and Outreach, and was funded by the Walton Family Foundation and supported by Sea Change, the Consortium for Cultivating Human and Naturally Regenerative Enterprises at Iowa State University. And I certainly did not do this alone. I want to give a shout out to my colleagues that worked for many months tirelessly on this project. Actually, that may not be true. We were tired quite a few days, but definitely want to thank Dr. Jay Arbuckle from Iowa State University, my major professor, Catherine DeLong, formerly with the Soil and Water Conservation Society and now with us at Iowa State University, and Claire Lindahl with the Soil and Water Conservation Society. And if I think some of my fellow team members are here, so I give you full permission if I say anything incorrect to please chime in. All right. So why are we here? What was the impetus for the Conservation Practitioner Poll? So in sociological and particularly rural sociological research and conservation adoption research, we spend a lot of time talking to farmers. I think that's absolutely appropriate given the fact that farmers are generally the folks that are implementing soil and water conservation practices on the ground. That being said, that wouldn't be able to occur without the work of conservation practitioners who aren't often given a voice in the research. And that's one thing that we wanted to address with this project. So who are conservation practitioners? Well, these are the field staff of conservation agencies and organizations who work directly with farmers and landowners in the field to address their soil and water and other natural resource conservation issues. Arguably, conservation practitioners are the most important part of the United States soil and water conservation delivery system. They are the folks out there working, as I said, in the field with the farmers to help them identify their conservation needs and to develop conservation plans to address those issues and needs. Because they're working one-on-one with farmers in the field, conservation practitioners are in a unique position to understand how conservation policy and programs work, and particularly what the strengths and weaknesses of those programs and policies might be. But as I said, this is a group of people that we rarely hear from in terms of the conservation adoption research. And so the Conservation Practitioner Poll was designed to bring those voices into policy and program development. And as Nathan said, this is something near and dear to my heart. I was a conservation practitioner for 15 years down in Texas, working as a range conservationist for the Natural Resources Conservation Service. And so I'm proud to be doing this work here at ISU. After working for 15 years for the NRCS, I decided that I wanted to use my experience and knowledge that I had gained to come to grad school and conduct research and teach the next generation of conservationists. And that's how that's how I stumbled into this project, and I'm very proud to be a part of it. So what is the Conservation Practitioner Poll? Well, it was an inaugural survey starting out in 2021. We sent that survey to conservation practitioners from 6 different states in the upper Mississippi River Basin. You can see a map of that watershed area here. So that included Indiana, Illinois, Iowa, Missouri, Minnesota, and Wisconsin. And we mainly talked to folks from the Natural Resources Conservation Service, county soil and water conservation districts, as well as state agriculture and conservation agencies, watershed groups, and wildlife groups. So this project, as I mentioned, was led by the Soil and Water Conservation Society with Iowa State University as a partner, and we were funded by the Walton Family Foundation. So this wasn't something that happened just in a box. We actually developed this survey with the help of conservation practitioners themselves. And towards the end of 2020 and the beginning of 2021, we held a series of focus groups with conservation practitioners across the Midwest in those 6 different states. And we really wanted to ask them, what are the issues that we should be talking about with respect to the work that you do? So we had them identify any issues in their jobs, potential areas that we should inquire about in the survey, and really got a tremendous amount of feedback on what we should talk about with this survey. Conservation practitioners are absolutely passionate about what they do, and they were really heavily invested in this project. And we got a good bit of feedback in terms of just the project itself. Well, most conservation practitioners we talked to said this is something that's needed and it's a good idea. So we certainly appreciated that. So we developed a draft survey instrument, and then we actually sent that out to the conservation practitioners that we had done the focus groups with to basically field test it and say, do you think we did a good job capturing your thoughts and concerns, and they helped us tweak that a little bit. And then in May and June of 2021, we sent the final survey out to 1,712 different conservation practitioners across those 6 states that I mentioned. We heard back from 415 respondents for a 24% response rate. And for any of you that have done surveys, you know that's actually a pretty good response rate. But we're hoping to get an even higher one with our next conservation practitioner poll. So overall, we were looking at the effectiveness of methods for establishing relationships with farmers and landowners, including strategies for getting best management conservation practices on the ground. We wanted to know about the relative ease and difficulty of different programs that implement conservation at the federal, state, and private level. And in general, we wanted to know what's working well, what's not working so well, what needs fixing. And we also wanted to know about conservation practitioners' background training and what types of professional development interests and further training that they might have. So we're going to dive right into this. I won't be talking about every single item on the survey because we don't have enough time for that. But at the end, I will provide a link to the full report so that you can read everything that we had. So the first question asked about effectiveness of outreach methods for starting relationships with farmers. So we're looking at how do you begin that relationship of conservation assistance. And so the top method of starting those relationships was introductions from trusted farmers. So using a farmer that you already had a relationship with to connect you with other farmers. 42% of respondents said that that was a highly effective method, and 40% said that that was effective. Also introductions by trusted conservation practitioners. So partnering with other folks either in your office or partnering agencies to help bridge that that gap with new farmers that you haven't worked with was the second most effective strategy. And then in third place was attending meetings, for instance, field days that farmers and landowners attended. That was a great way to network with other farmers and initiate that relationship. Overall, there were 17 items on this list that we had the practitioners rate, and at the bottom of the list was offering branded swag, targeted Facebook ads, and billboards. Although everything on this list was something that the conservation practitioners brought up in those original focus groups is something that they've tried. The things that work for most people bubbled up to the top, and that's what you see here. So what about getting conservation practices on the ground once you've established that relationship? 86% of folks said that building long-term relationships with farmers and landowners through multiple interactions over time was highly effective. And this actually corresponds really nicely with other research that I have done, finding that sustained relationships with multiple interactions with a conservation professional over time was the most consistent predictor of conservation practice use by farmers. So obviously that relationship is really central to the work that conservation practitioners do. Slightly related but different, working face-to-face with farmers and landowners in the field was another strategy that works well to get conservation on the ground. So this would be opposed to things like speaking with farmers on the phone or communicating by email. Being in the field obviously rose to the top as a really integral part of what conservation practitioners do to get those practices established. Obviously, cost share programs, the third most effective strategy. We spend millions of dollars on cost share programs that help farmers with the cost of implementing those practices. And so it's no surprise that came up. Working face-to-face with farmers or landowners in your office was in fourth place. So although that key interaction happens in the field, obviously there's a lot of work that conservation practitioners do with farmers in the office, and that's an important piece as well. And then those in-person field days and workshops, also a way to discuss with farmers how to get those practices established in the field. So we also asked, what's working well, what's not working well in the workplace with programs and working with farmers. And the number one concern that was brought up was it's frustrating when program rules and procedures change from year to year. And this was echoed in the listening session or in the focus groups that we held. Conservation practitioners said, oftentimes it's like implementing an entire new program from year to year because of how much has changed. And a lot of times they don't get access to the new policies and procedures until right before they're having to implement these programs. And so that's obviously a top frustration. High rate of turnover was also a frustrating aspect of their job. That negatively impacts the momentum of working with farmers in the field, especially if you're having a new person in the office every year or two. That's going to interrupt that long-term relationship and be a detriment to the momentum of installing practices. Conservation practitioners also said that organizations should facilitate more face-to-face time with farmers and landowners. In the focus groups, we found that most conservation practitioners reported spending only somewhere between 5 and 15% of their time in the field working face-to-face with farmers. The rest of the time was spent working on paperwork and doing work in the computer. While that's important, as I've mentioned multiple times, that face-to-face interaction is really critical. And so finding a way for these organizations to actually facilitate that was a top recommendation. And then the amount of paperwork and procedures that farmers and landowners have to do, being a discouragement to participation in programs. We've definitely heard this from the farmer side of things, that a lot of times programs just involve too much paperwork, too much red tape, and too much bureaucracy that it makes it not worth their time. So that's something that came up as an issue in this survey. And then we took a look at different conservation programs in terms of their ease of administration. This is the full list here. A lot of these you've probably heard of. EQIP, CSP, and CRP are some of the most popular conservation programs at the federal level. And then there's also conservation technical assistance, which is the heart of what conservationists do in their work with farmers. That's just basically giving advice out in the field. And then you also have targeted watershed programs, state level programs, and privately funded programs, such as the Coca-Cola program to incentivize cover crop production. So we had each of the respondents rate their ease from very difficult to very easy for each of these programs. And I'll talk about the top four and then the bottom one. So at number one, state level conservation programs actually came to the top. And what we learned from the focus groups was that conservation practitioners felt that state level conservation programs had less paperwork, had more flexibility. The deadlines were less rigorous in terms of getting things done. And so actually it helped facilitate getting the farmers in and out and allowing them to get their practices installed a lot easier. So those state level programs were rated the highest in terms of being easy. Below that, we have conservation technical assistance. And again, that's basically anything that's not directly tied to a particular program. So anytime a conservation practitioner is doing work with a farmer or a landowner, giving them advice, helping them inventory their needs, that's CTA. And without the rigors of the money tied to it, obviously they found that to be a little bit easier. And then we had the conservation reserve program, also called the set aside program. That was the third in terms of ease of administration. And then that was followed up by the EQIP, Environmental Quality Incentives Program. Interestingly, with this, although these were the top four, you can see a definite decrease in ease going from the state level programs and the conservation assistance, and then getting down into the federal conservation programs. I thought that was interesting. And for anybody that has worked with the CSP program, this might not be surprising. The Conservation Stewardship Program was rated the most difficult, least easy to work with. And this is definitely something that we heard over and over in the focus groups with conservation practitioners. The major concerns with this program, while they said that it did accomplish its goals and it had the potential to be a good program in many ways, the paperwork was a huge burden, as was the ranking process to get these farmers enrolled in the program, and several other concerns that I won't go into now. But for all those reasons, this was ranked last in terms of ease of administration. So then we asked conservation practitioners, what can we do to improve program effectiveness? We talked about what's not going so well. How can we make this better? So number one, they said that being trained on any new program rules and policies, and particularly well before the program application window, was huge. 68% of respondents said that that was very helpful, and 27% said that it was helpful. So this rose to the top as something that would help make programs more effective. And again, if your rules and policies are changing dramatically from year to year, at least being trained about those beforehand, it makes sense that that would make things go more smoothly. And then number two, not surprising, program rules and policies being more consistent from year to year obviously would be something that would make things easier. Better communication between agencies and partners regarding those program rules and policies was brought up. Again, this was something that came up in the focus groups with conservation practitioners, saying that, for instance, maybe if they were a soil and water conservation district employee, they may not have had training specific to federal NRCS programs. And so when they were talking to farmers, they didn't feel as confident being able to talk about the intricacies of the policies and rules and deadlines. And so they thought, if we're going to work better as a team in a district office, there should definitely be some better communication between the agencies to help facilitate that communication about programs. And then software came up a lot. More user-friendly planning and contracting software would definitely be a bonus in this realm. mostly because the software, and particularly the ranking software, and again going back to the CSP program, can be pretty onerous and glitchy. Glitchy was a word that came up a lot in those focus groups, and so improving that would help to improve overall program effectiveness. We also asked the conservation practitioners about their overall education and training background. So lots of experience in soil science, environmental science, water resources management, agronomy, and wildlife management. And that's pretty much what we would expect. Interestingly, although wildlife management was one of the things that they felt that they had a lot of training about, it was also the number one training need that they identified, with 39% being interested and 25% being very interested in having more additional training about wildlife habitat management. Also, agriculture technology and agricultural production practices came up in training needs. I think it's clear, and this certainly echoes my experience as a conservation practitioner. Conservation practitioners care about what farmers do and how they do it, and they want to be knowledgeable about the most current technologies and practices that are being used out on the farms. And so they would appreciate further training in these arenas. We also had interest in precision conservation technology, for example, the ACPF. And this type of software basically identifies different parts of a watershed where you can install conservation practices for improving water quality and get the most bang for your buck. And that's something that we'll be hearing more about in the future, I think. There's a lot of talk these days about carbon capture and ecosystem services, particularly with climate change discussion. And we asked conservation practitioners, what do you know about this? 64%, the vast majority, said that they have basically no knowledge about these types of services. 26% said they knew something about it, but nobody was very knowledgeable about this. So obviously, if this is an increasing area where farmers are going to be interacting with these programs, it would be a good idea for conservation practitioners to get training in this area. And as a matter of fact, 61% said that they would like to receive training and information to be able to assist farmers and landowners if they asked about these privately funded ecosystem service payment programs. So that's definitely a need that we can help address. Climate change in agriculture came up, asking conservation practitioners, are you comfortable offering technical assistance about climate smart agriculture? 37% said that they were, but 45% said that they weren't. And again, not surprisingly, in order to address that knowledge gap, 68% said that they would like to receive training about climate smart agriculture. And so that's pretty much it for the individual questions. So just to summarize the key findings of this inaugural poll, number one, face-to-face approaches are the best for establishing relationships of trust over time and to get those practices on the ground on that farmland. And it so happens it's one of the most enjoyable part of conservation practitioners' jobs. That was certainly my experience when I was doing it. So I included a few quotes from the focus groups here. A watershed coordinator from Iowa says, one-on-one with farmers, I would say, always ends up being the most effective. And small conversations end up leading to their adoption of practices, and then their neighbors, and then their sons. And then a DC in Iowa says, I feel most effective whenever we're actually out meeting with the producers and having that face-to-face contact with them. Also, the complexity of programs, the rules and eligibility determination with those programs and overall paperwork is incredibly frustrating, both to conservation practitioners and the farmers and landowners that they're working with. So that's definitely an issue. Also, staff turnover in conservation offices can really hurt momentum of conservation adoption, and that's something that could potentially be addressed. And both of these areas act as barriers to getting conservation on the ground. As a a SoilCon in Missouri says there's too much emphasis on contracts and too little emphasis on meeting with producers on site. Producers are looking for faster service and less paperwork. And then a watershed coordinator from Iowa says, with the staffing, all the turnover that there's been, that's a barrier to being able to keep up your progress and your momentum and move forward. And then identifying the training needs for conservation practitioners, we definitely saw a high interest in professional development in the areas of wildlife management, production practices, and precision conservation tools, as well as a need for learning more about carbon ecosystem services markets and programs and climate smart agricultural practices. And as the SoilCon in Indiana said, although most farmers agree that climate change is happening, there's continuing disagreement on the actual causes. And so getting training on how to interact with farmers more effectively in discussing some of these issues was identified as a definite need in terms of training. So as far as where you can get more information, this is the link, and I can try to post this in the chat. The full Conservation Practitioner Report is available through the Journal of Soil and Water Conservation website, and that is free and available to the public, this particular article. We're also going to be following up, doing an in-depth analysis of the data, so comparing the results by organization, state, age, and gender to see if there's any type of patterns, and that's something that I will be presenting later this year. And then we definitely want to use these findings. We don't want this to be something that we did once and then never thought about again. So working with the soil and water conservation community, not only here in Iowa, but across the nation, to inform the discussion of improving the strengths and addressing the weaknesses in policies and programs. Again, these conservation practitioners are the folks that work in the field with farmers. They're on the front lines of getting conservation on the ground, and it makes sense that we should utilize their voices and perspectives to help guide how to improve policies and programs. And then in 2023, I can't believe it's already coming around to this again, but we're going to be doing a second conservation practitioner poll. So if you're a conservation practitioner and you get that email from the Soil and Water Conservation Society, we would encourage you to take that survey and make your voice and your perspective known. That's definitely something that we value, and it would be valuable not just to us as researchers, but to your fellow conservation practitioners, the agencies that you work for, and the farmers that you work with. And I think that's all I've got for right now. So I appreciate your time and attention today. And at this point, you can put questions in the chat, and Nathan is going to help me facilitate that. And then I'll move to the next slide here. If you're getting continuing education credits, here's the information for that.
All right, well, we'll give the people a few seconds here to kind of come up with some questions. But yeah, I'll start off with a question. Was there any finding in the poll that surprised you? And also, were there any questions that didn't make it that you might want to dig in a little deeper with the next round?
Yeah, those are great questions. Surprising findings. I think it was interesting that there's a lot of experience with conservation practitioners, prior knowledge and experience about wildlife habitat management, and yet that's something that they definitely want to get more information on. That was kind of unexpected. I guess I was able to cheat a little bit, having been a conservation practitioner myself, so I wasn't surprised by a whole lot of the findings, because it seemed to ring true with my experience. I'll have to think about that. In terms of questions that didn't make it, oh, there's so many. We could put one of these out every single year and never run out of questions. I definitely want to dive into what conservation practitioners think works with convincing farmers to adopt conservation practices that they might not be initially comfortable with. I'd like to get into the effectiveness of conservation planning, what goes well during that process, what doesn't go well, what could be improved. And I think there's a lot more that we could dive into about programs. We kind of did general information and perspectives on conservation programs, but we could definitely dive deeper into the nitty gritty of what could be improved there. And I think that could be really valuable.
Okay, let's see here. Linda would like you to put if you could type the link to the full report in the chat box. That way, maybe they could just click on it and send them right there.
You bet.
We have a question in here. Here, I'll read it. Okay, so these results have great promise for guiding policies and procedures. Have you run across any information about what would be the best avenue for assuring that they both inform decision makers and are consulted prior to policy procedure formation?
Could you repeat that again? I was busy.
Yeah, sorry, I had you doing two things at once here. Yeah, so the results are great promise and the guiding policies and procedures. Have you run across any information about what would be the best avenue for assuring that they both inform decision makers and are consulted prior to policy procedure formation?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we got all this great data. What do we do with it to make sure that it actually has an impact? And how do we make sure that conservation practitioners' perspectives are continuing to be heard and actually utilized? I think a great way to start out is being involved in an organization like the Soil and Water Conservation Society. I'm a little biased because I'm a member, and that's an organization that I've definitely gotten a lot out of. But there's chapter meetings, there's state meetings, and then there's the national meeting. And at all of those different levels with that organization, you have the ability to network with folks in your particular agency that are in positions of leadership. Those are opportunities where you can actually talk to the people that are making these decisions. You can share your perspectives along with your other counterparts and have important conversations about how we can do things more effectively. So just having that representation there. And then also the Soil and Water Conservation Society does a lot of work in DC, talking to our conservation leaders and taking this information that we're getting from conservation practitioners and giving it to the people who have the power to make a difference. So I think that's one avenue. Participating in the poll when we send it out is definitely something that you can do to make your voice heard, and then talking to your own leadership in the agencies that you work for. Obviously in any organization you have to go through the channels, but I think it is important to make your voice heard, and that's a way to go about it. And then as a team, we're going to be sharing this information across the board. We've actually already started sharing this report with leadership, and so we hope that that's going to have a positive impact as well.
All right. Thank you, Clark, for that question. Greg has a question. This is a great question. COVID has brought about more online training and information opportunities, but has reduced face-to-face interaction with farmers. How do you think COVID influenced responses to the survey?
Yeah, that's a great question. I actually don't have any insight on how COVID, affected individual responses, but I think, in terms of the focus groups that we held with conservation practitioners, we definitely talked a lot about COVID and how that has affected things. That was brought up as a frustration by a lot of conservation practitioners who said, face-to-face is what works. We want to be out in the field with farmers, and yet that's really stymied by the fact that we can't do that as much as we wanted to. Lots of people talked about momentum with particular projects getting on the ground, or relationships with particular farmers, and how they were, prior to March 2020, they were really getting going, and then everything dropped off after that. That was incredibly frustrating for everyone involved. We actually, I guess, going back to Nathan, you asked about a surprising finding. We thought that perhaps in the age of COVID over the past couple of years that technical assistance delivered through phone and email and Zoom meetings and things like that would have increased in prominence and effectiveness. And actually the results say that that's not the case, that good old-fashioned meeting in person when you can and doing it safely it was still the most effective way of getting conservation on the ground. So yeah, we took a hit on not being able to do as much one-on-one face-to-face interaction, but hopefully that's something that's going to be improving from here on out. Fingers crossed.
Okay, I don't see any more questions at this time. So if you want to advance this slide, and then if you could, Chris, provide the link to Linda Fitzgerald. She's looking for, or if you could just put the link in general. I don't know if you have access to the chat box.
I do. Do I have access to the actual link, though?
I know I tried to copy and pasting from the PowerPoint, won't work.
Yeah.
Either way, we'll get it to you, Linda. Maybe you could type your email address into the chat box and I can send it to you directly. With that said, I want to highlight next week's webinar on Wednesday, February 9th. It's going to be with Dana Colpin, comprehensive statewide spatio-temporal assessment of PFAS in an agricultural region of the US. I love these long titles. They are wonderful. Okay, great. You got the link in the chat box.
Got it.
To everyone. Sweet. All right. Well, I think that's gonna do it. I'd like to thank everybody for taking time out of their schedule to join us today. Especially like to thank you, Chris, for sharing the information that you've gathered, and good luck to the poll in the future.
Thank you so much. I appreciate everyone being here. Nathan, thank you for the technical support. And again, Iowa Learning Farms, thank you so much for the work that you do. We really appreciate it. And if anybody would like to talk to me further about this, feel free to shoot me an email. My email is cmorris, CMORRIS @iastate.edu.
All right. We'll see everybody hopefully next week. Take care.